All right, we are live, and we are going to start our book reading. Um, this is A New History of Immigration by Jaclyn Backhaus. I hope I am pronouncing that right. Um, Today, we are going to do the epilogue and chapter one. I have been trying to read more myself, trying to get back into the habit. And one of the ways I felt like I could do it is by reading live, right? And also publicizing this amazing book. The Conversation. It's a conversation that I've had many times since high school, usually with someone whom I've just met. The conversation seems, on one hand, well meaning and innocuous. And yet, since these early days, I always feel an acute sting while having it. The conversation goes something like this: the person whom I've just met will make small talk to inquire a little more about me. So, where are you from? They'll ask. Arizona, I reply. Oh, they say, seeming a tad unsatisfied with the answer. They try again. What about your parents? Where are they from? They ask. My mom is from California and my dad is from New Jersey, I reply, becoming aware of an angle to the inquiry. Ah, they reply. They pause. Then, before reframing their question with a bit more specificity, I was wondering more about where they're from ethnically. Ethnically, I say, as though I've never been asked before. Like, where are they from? Oh. Depending on who they are, if I feel I can trust them, I tell them my story. My mother's parents, this is Jaclyn Backhaus writing, my mother's parents were immigrants from Punjab, a province in South Asia that straddles the border of India and Pakistan. My father's parents were immigrants from Germany. Usually at that point, the asker is satisfied with the answer. Perhaps I will receive a small wow at the revelation of my parents' interracial marriage, which would have been illegal until 1967, when the Supreme Court ruled in Loving versus Virginia that bans against interracial marriage violated the 14th Amendment of the US Constitution. But at the end of it all, the conversation leaves me with a feeling of otherness, by implying that I am not from Arizona, that because I look a certain way, I must be from somewhere else. The conversation seems to suggest that I do not belong here in my home country, the country where my family immigrated in the early half of the 20th century. Maybe you feel that way too. Maybe the conversation makes you feel othered or just annoyed. The irony is that so often the people who are asking those questions are also the descendants of immigrants, because so many Americans are. Excuse me about the little coughing I got to yeah, dealing with. Well, let's be honest. I'm a smoker, so I got a bit of a smoker's cough. But I also work out a lot and train a lot, so maybe that adds to it. Plus, I grew up in Bangalore, which has for 16 years, which like kind of gave me lifelong throat and sort of lung clearance issues, shall we say. All right, back to the book. This amazing book, New History of Immigration by Jaclyn Backhaus. Chapter 1. America, a nation of immigrants? The United States of America, I got to get my voice back. The United States of America has long been touted as a quote unquote nation of immigrants. This phrase is often used to describe how our country is mostly made up of citizens who are not native to this land, meaning that they or their ancestors arrived here as immigrants. Maybe you've heard this phrase used before in political speeches or overheard it in conversations between friends and family. You may have even read it in books. The phrase became popular back in 1958 when John F. Kennedy, then a senator from Massachusetts who could trace his family roots to Ireland, love the Irish, published an essay that later became a book with the same title, A Nation of Immigrants. In his book, Kennedy argued that the United States is at its best when it remains a safe haven for immigrants and refugees. It may or may not come as a surprise to you to learn that when he published the book, this was an unpopular argument to make. And to many people today, that argument is still unpopular. Ultimately, Kennedy's book was a success, and it would help pave the way for the senator to become the 35th president of the United States in 1961. Though he was assassinated in November 1963, A Nation of Immigrants would help lay the foundation for the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965, which aimed to remove discrimination in the United States immigration policy. But as you'll learn, despite the act's ambitious intentions, it did not effectively end discrimination against immigrants, even today. Beyond Kennedy's proclamation of America as quote unquote, a nation of immigrants, there have been other words and phrases used in an attempt to describe the vast population of peoples living in the United States. Phrases like melting pot and patchwork quilt, for example. Regardless of which phrases you may have heard, each implies a similar sense of the joining together of different ingredients or threads to make a more unified whole. The way all of America's inhabitants, with their different cultural and social habits, contribute to a greater, stronger, and richer American fabric. Consider our country's name, the United States of America. 50 states that are stronger together than separated. In 1776, when the original 13 colonies joined together, declaring their independence from British rule, each colony and its people, most of them immigrants from Great Britain or their direct descendants, came together as one. But words are powerful, complicated, and at times insufficient. Ask yourself this: does the phrase, a nation of immigrants, speak to each one of America's 332 million residents? Do Native Americans, the indigenous people of this land, consider themselves included? What about today's descendants of enslaved Africans who were kidnapped from their homelands beginning in the 1600s and brought to this land against their will? The answers to these questions are complicated, just like the issue of immigration and its processes. Some of the stories in this book will undoubtedly portray uncomfortable and difficult situations, or as some historians like Hassan Kwame Jeffries call it, hard history. Hard history is made up of the stories that are often left out of textbooks. That's because much of history is written through a selective, nostalgic lens. We all, short break from reading, but all countries are guilty of this. I want to take a little break from this chapter to talk about also the fact that I probably identify a lot with Jaclyn Backhaus's parents, because I'm an immigrant myself. My daughter is interracial. My wife is German American of many generations, but of German heritage, and my daughter is interracial. So, but simultaneously, I also want to not exceptionalize either American bigotry, American racism, any of that. Like immigrants come also with their own baggage, and if there isn't if it's felt like those who are born here aren't capable of handling critique to quote unquote their country, the country that we become a part of, like immigrants like me become a part of, then you know what, we are less likely to take critique of the places that and it doesn't help growth on either side. So it's important in this day and age. Like I can't believe that Kennedy actually came on a semi-pro immigrant platform. Like it's amazing to me. I don't know any candidate, Republican or Democrat, who would be able. It's sad. We've gone backwards, in the same way as we've gone backwards in terms of our fights against misogyny, our fights against friggin' anti-Semitism. I never thought that would make such a crazy resurgence, and other forms of just hatred and bigotry, and also just the rise of just hateful organizations worldwide. All, I didn't mean to single out any particular religion or anything like that. They're all fucking crap anyway. So sorry about that little Editorializing, I apologize. Please don't let my ranting keep you away from this amazing book by Jaclyn Backhaus. All right, let's go back to the book. All right, Backhaus writes, that's because much of history is written through a selective nostalgic lens, meaning that it focuses only on the good parts while ignoring the bad parts. Take the very founding of our country, for example. You probably learned that Christopher Columbus discovered America in 1492, and for that feat, he is a hero. For Columbus's role in the shaping of the Americas and the world was surely monumental. The full history of his story is one filled with colonization and genocide, the deliberate destruction of a group of people. In this case, the indigenous people of the land we today call America. When considering this fuller context, it is more complicated to call Columbus a hero, isn't it? This is hard history. In this book, we will not shy away from this hard history. In fact, we will confront the legacies of violence, hatred, bigotry, white supremacy, oppression, and systemic racism head on so we can better understand how we might combat them. These histories will touch on stories from people who can trace their lineages to all over the globe, and perhaps they will echo or represent stories from your own lineage. We will spend time looking at the early settlers from Germany, Ireland, and Italy, who were not as warmly welcomed as you might think. We learn about the importance and power of words surrounding the current immigration debate. For example, how the word immigrant is different than the word refugee. We'll also look at the history of our fluid and oft-changing borderlands and learn about the people from the global south who seek to cross our borders today. Hello. That would be me. All right, back to book. Sorry. Backhouse writes, and we'll hear immigrant stories from East Asia, Southeast Asia, and South Asia, and learn about how the American civil rights movement helped pave the way for their welcoming. This is so much more ground to cover on the topic of immigration in America than we have the pages for, but our hope is that you end this book with more context about how our history informs the present moment. First, let's look at the earliest years of the country's founding and the moments that led up to the signing of the Declaration of Independence. This will give us the proper foundation to begin understanding who we truly are as a nation. Then we can begin to look more closely at the phrase, a nation of immigrants, its political origins, its problematic status, and its hopeful promise. All right, well, that was no, that is not chapter one. That is chapter one, part one. All right. Brief editorializing. Sorry, not editorializing, just a little commentary. I'm sorry for like the, but I appreciate also the framing of this because I truly do believe that those who consider themselves, like and I'm just going to nativism, that destructive force that destroys all countries with promise towards like realizing a greater humanity. Which is ultimately what we need to realize as humanity, like without borders or religions or nationalities or anything else that like divide us. All of these are like just artificial constructs after all. And so while also embracing difference as needed for the continued evolution of humanity, without the natural pressures that we have now for centuries been able to like harness technology in like quite frankly like in many ways like de-evolving in many ways. So and one of the frameworks that I really like is the fact that she asks all Americans, regardless of where they're from, to in fact investigate where indeed they are from, because like now I'm like exploring even like a much more ancient history of this continent. And when we only look at like American history as starting in 1776 or even 1492, we forget like actually like the many centuries of, and I use this word much more broadly, like colonization that did happen, and like a lot of the many great and brutal civilizations that existed that actually like for centuries in fact like even beat the ever loving shit out of like European settlers, like for a long time until like technology took over, and like and so it's always been that way with humanity for a long time. I think ever since like agrarianism and like sort of like the establishment of like sort of much more like social and economic forms of patriarchy and misogyny and things like that. So And I think we kind of like lose out on that rich ancient history, which like is drenched in a lot of like amazing goodness, but also drenched in a lot of blood. Like like I think one of the things that like Jaclyn like is already like pushing us to do is that like we none of us should hide from our own histories. Like I like full on like disclosure now, is like I like if I'm here in America as an Indian immigrant, like make no mistake about it, it's because I had it real good in India. Like I come from like one of the dominant castes. I come from like one of the dominant classes. Like like my parents had a house, a car, which put us like right up in the top, like freaking like 5% economically. Like so it's like these are all like important things to like carry with us. And simultaneously, whatever economic privileges I have, like America is so wealthy and the West is so wealthy that it translates to like basically like lower middle working class privileges here, and like that needs to be talked about too, because like Americans are white, like Western people who are born here, and it's not just white people, but like in general people who are born here cannot use like the oppression of that, the very legitimate like crap, like centuries and thousands of years old, that oppression that's going on in places like, for instance, India, with the abhorrence of the caste system, which is like, I will straight up say, is way worse than like anything you see here in current day America. Like we have to be rational human beings about this stuff. And like I feel like someone like Backhaus with this like really eloquently written, like yet accessible book, like provides that framing for us. Like okay, let's get back to like less of my stupid ranting and more like of this part 2 of chapter 1, a brief history of America's founding and philosophy. Backhaus writes, beginning in the late 16th century, the first European settlers arrived on the shores of what is now the east coast of the United States. Throughout the 17th century, more Europeans would continue to arrive, settle on the land, and establish their own colonies, despite the fact much of the land was already inhabited by indigenous people. You may have heard of the Pilgrims, a small group of Puritans from England who in 1620 came across the Atlantic on the Mayflower to establish Plymouth Colony in what is now the state of Massachusetts. For the next century, more British colonies would be settled on the Atlantic coast. These colonies were known as the 13 Colonies. By 1776, these colonies came together to declare their full independence from Great Britain by drafting the Declaration of Independence, a document stating all the reasons why they wanted freedom from the King of England. Let's appreciate the anti-monarchism in this founding. Like it, like of course it was like hella racist and like and then it, but like there were some things, and like it was originally sort of in many ways like petty bourgeois settler colonizers against like the monarchical bourgeoisie of like England. But simultaneously, and this is really also important, and like the complicated history, while there was that liberatory angle to like of like wanting like to establish their own colonies and have independence from the crown, etc., it's interesting how like actually like it was that being kind of like for slavery was in fact like one of the reasons, that one of the sparks that actually like sparked a little, like this has come out in like a lot of like documented history now, that like, and this is well known, like the founding fathers of America were like for the most part all slave owners, and like pretty much for the most part pro slavery. Like I mean it was the economic foundation for like America, like to start getting a march over like sort of the older European colonial powers. So yeah, like so that complicated uh, founding history of like people escaping persecution, but then eventually and establishing colonies, both via like hard work and brutality to the indigenous people, simultaneously coupled with their progeny, eventually like sort of like becoming establishing like private ownership over the land and wanting greater lesser taxation from the monarchy, etc., etc., like combined with like realizing that like the transatlantic slave trade could be like harnessed, could be supercharged to their benefit to establish like this new American colonial power that would both like ultimately like cut loose from the European colonial parents, while also like enhancing the brutality to like establish it as an even more dominant power in many ways. So like okay, back to the book. Backhaus writes in that document, which is the Declaration of Independence, there is one famous phrase that you likely have heard: We hold these truths to be self evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The men who crafted that document, known as the founders, undoubtedly had great foresight and wisdom as they laid down their vision for their new country and established the protection of its citizens. But as you'll soon learn, these men were hardly perfect. In fact, most of the men who are considered founders also enslaved people and profited off slavery. This fact in itself might give you pause when considering why then had they written, all men are created equal, and that each person has the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Surely they did not believe that an enslaved person in 1776 was entitled to the right of freedom. Soon after the new country was officially established, waves of Europeans continued to arrive on America's Atlantic coast, each person seeking a new life, freedom, and a chance at happiness, the American dream. But with much of the land in these colonies having already been inhabited by the earliest Europeans and indigenous people, these new arrivals would begin heading farther west to uncharted, at least to the new Europeans, lands. And in doing so, a new worldview was born. Manifest destiny. Dun, dun, dun. The belief that expansion throughout the United States was not only justified, but inevitable. Goodness gracious me. Sorry again for like that commentary, but yeah, I'm telling you, man, like, whew, there's a lot of brutality in like the founding of our country, and it's my country now. All y'all like people, many of y'all, whoever hates me, y'all, yeah, you're gonna feel like your government done fucked up, but like giving me citizenship, but um. Uh, yes, there are a lot of things that would suggest otherwise, because they wouldn't have given me citizenship else, because I know that they're calculating how much economic value I bring to this country and all the hoops that I had to jump through that in order to get it, so that said citizenship could be acquired. Yeah, America. Oh, yeah. But, okay, we're going to part three now. But before we talk about Manifest Destiny, I do want to have a little thing, because everywhere that I see, right, like, and this is important with like every sort of like organization of humanity that takes place, whether it's like America, starting in like the 14, like 1600s, etc., uh, or like whatever, like countries, like nation states that were before then, in the land, whatever nation states there are, and like other parts of the world, like whatever organizational foundation of humanity that like keeps you know going through different cycles and like boom and bust, etc. There are always little kernels to each of that thing, like little nuggets, each of those that like should be preserved. And one of those nuggets, I think, like, I'm hopeful, and this is me trying to like reach out to like rah 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 American patriots and nationalists and like red, white, and blue people, and like even those like fucking like them like Baba Gut motherfuckers cosplaying for like Meal Team 6, like all of them, like it's like there is something that can be saved. And for me, that in this country, as far as like what I will like when I feel like, okay, this I will defend, like is like the idea of like liberty, the idea of like rationalism, the idea of reason, like um I think like I don't think that this is, none of these are American exceptional ideas. None of these are like Western, like none of them. The documented history of like these ideas of reason and rationality, liberty, liberation, freedom, etc., are as old as humanity. Anybody thinking otherwise is a goddamn ethno-fascist, proto-ethno-fascist freakazoid who needs help and needs to like look into themselves. And but these ideas are still like when we using like sort of these sort of like whatever like uh terminologies to like phrase them are important to like hold on to, because I think those are the sort of like elemental forms of like humanity that like need to be like protected. And that's something that like, yeah, let's, I mean, if like patriotism is like your drug, like, yeah, like then hold on to like the patriotism of humanity that like somewhere deep down in America's founding was like somewhere there, like the patriotism of like I don't know, like be a patriotic like you know humanitarian or libertarian or like a person who truly like and if you're someone who like takes away the liberty of others, like that's it, you are not any of those, like so and if you are one of those people who like thrive on hatred and exclusion, fuck you. Seriously. All right. Part three. Someone far more with far more eloquent than I am is writing, and you should listen to this. Right? Backhaus, Jaclyn Backhaus writes part three, chapter one of A New History of Immigration. Part three, Manifest Destiny. Backhaus writes, the term was coined in 1845, and many of its advocates believed that they were destined by God to spread democracy across the country. The idea of manifest destiny can be traced further back to a white European colonialist mentality set down by the earliest colonizer. After Cristoforo Colombo, or as most Americans know him, Christopher Columbus, arrived on charter from the Spanish royal family to the Caribbean and began to enslave indigenous people and exploit the resources found there. Europeans developed the doctrine of discovery. What is this doctrine, you might ask? It is another ideology that predates and informs manifest destiny. And here's a definition for all y'all in case you want it. What's that word? An ideology is a system of beliefs and ideas. This system can inform things as large as theories held by entire societies, political parties, or cultures, or it can be as small as a personal belief. Ideologies can be the basis for people's actions, and depending on what the ideology is, it can be helpful or harmful. Often, historians reflecting on past events trace how certain ideologies might have impacted how these events occurred and what they may have changed about society at large. Elements of the doctrine of discovery date all the way back to the 1100s. The doctrine of discovery is used to justify the forced colonization and domination of lands that are not inherently Christian. Oh. hmm Thus, the white Europeans' discovery of other existing and well established cultures and societies in the Western Hemisphere in both North and South America did not mean that they were going to accept, celebrate, or attempt to learn from those societies. Rather, they were going to dominate them in the name of Christianity. Manifest destiny is a concept that both described a particular American version of the old doctrine of discovery and also foreshadowed the shifting borders of what we now call the United States. Small commentary break. People, loved ones, fellow humans. If you're leading your life based on thinking any one book is like the end all and be all, no, no, please seek help. No, we're past that, long past it. When is this age of reason that I was promised going to come forth? It all comes back to the same crap. Religion, organized religion, misogynistic books written by insufferable, miserable incels meant to garner power and pelf by controlling Iron Age and Bronze Age peasantry. Do we need them? We don't. We really don't. Please join the rest of us who are proud to be soil in waiting. We are proud to be nothing more than random specks of life in this beautiful random earth, in this beautiful, wondrous random universe without requiring some misogynistic, insufferable, incel skyfather. Please join us. It is nicer here. The beer is better. The weed is better. The laughs are better. And we don't take ourselves as seriously. And we don't really want to conquer. We don't have that in us. We really don't want to conquer. We just want to live in peace, really. Mostly peace from like the crazier versions of all you fucking people who follow these crazy misogynistic faiths All of them. I'm not naming any one of them because some from some kind of tend to like be a little crazier. So, peace unto all of you, please. But come, there are many of us waiting to enter the age of reason, and we are being held back. Thank you for bearing with me on this commentary. I'm going to go back to Jaclyn Backhaus. Part 4, Chapter 1, New History of Immigration. Thank you. America, the land of opportunity. Jaclyn Backhaus writes, you may have heard that America is a place where everyone has a seat at the table, where people come for a better life and better futures for their children. The United States of America has long been framed in books, films, and other cultural narratives as a quote unquote land of opportunity. But for the 1 million immigrants who arrive to the United States each year, this framing is a best case scenario, meaning that this isn't the case for everyone. These best case scenarios are often not all they seem to be, though. For immigrants to the United States of America, to the land of opportunity, their experiences are often different from their expectations. This has often been true for every wave of immigration in our country's short history. In fact, the very idea of unity in these United States can be contested, beginning with our origin story and the language we use to describe the country's founding. For example, the use of the phrase e pluribus unum, that translates to out of the many, one, does not derive from the notion of immigration. In more recent history, it is invoked to spark unity from Americans of all backgrounds and beliefs. But originally, the phrase was used as a motto in 1776 by the 13 colonies who collectively waged war for independence from the King of England. That war, the American Revolution, was won against the British on lands that were stolen from several indigenous tribes whose ancestral homelands comprised the entire eastern United States. Unity, togetherness, and oneness feel very far away when that context is considered. Let's also look closer at the idea of America as a quote unquote melting pot. This phrase was first coined by Israel Zangwill, a British Jewish playwright who wrote a play in 1908 called The Melting Pot. Zangwill's title became a metaphor or symbol for America at large, that immigrants from all nations can arrive and become Americans together. It is a notion filled once again with promise that together we can stand united. However, the phrase also contains a central problem. It hints at the notion of assimilation, the stripping away of identity in order to conform to a norm, often set in place by a known hierarchy, a system in which people are ranked and classified by status. In many ways, the phrase implies a potential loss of self, loss of identity, and loss of origin. What's that word? Assimilation is the process or method by which a group of or culture adopts the values, beliefs, languages, and behaviors of the culture in power. Sometimes this process occurs voluntarily, other times it's by force. Methods of assimilation can be conscious decisions, like changing one's name to be more easily pronounced. Sometimes these methods are unconscious, like distancing oneself from community customs. Immigrants from each wave and era have dealt with assimilation in different ways. Assimilation isn't inherently bad, but when it is subjected upon a minority group, it can be traumatic when the people in that group are forced to suppress their culture and, in many cases, abandon their native language. Almost 250 years since the United States fought a war for its independence from the British, we are enmeshed in a way of perspective and context on the very immigrants who come to our shores and our borders. As we work hard, vote, and advocate for better lives for ourselves as US citizens, our short memories are in plain sight as we let the plight of the immigrant become a politically debated issue. How then can we claim to be a nation of immigrants when we are not giving our current immigrants the tools, resources, and support they need to thrive? Backhaus continues. What happens when we remember that at some point, perhaps our ancestors arrived here with a similar hope as those who arrived here today? That the dangers and unknowns of arriving to a new place with hope and adaptability were likely part of our ancestors' experience. And what happens then when we remember that not everyone who lives here is an immigrant or a descendant of an immigrant? The phrase, quote unquote, a nation of immigrants presents an erasure of two key historical components that were vital to the founding and building of this country: the indigenous tribes who were displaced by the arrival of the first settlers, and the kidnapped Africans who were enslaved and brought to this land by force. And before I go on to the concluding part 5 and part 6 of chapter 1, I do wish to talk a little bit about this final thing. The phrase, a nation of immigrants, presents an erasure of two key historical components that were vital to the founding and building of this country: the indigenous tribes who were displaced by the arrival of the first settlers, and the kidnapped Africans who were enslaved and brought to this land by force. I love how she phrases this, because she also complicates. I don't know whether she might agree with how I am framing it, but she brings in a very, very important class narrative to also understanding America as a nation of immigrants. Model minority immigrants such as myself, who come and can settle very, very easily, while we still have to jump through the hoops of the settler hoops of fire. We jump through them far easier and eventually get settler privileges that put us in a socioeconomic position. And I want to be extremely clear about this, because from my own empirical observations, we get model minority immigrants like myself who settle down and settle pretty easily into like the middle class of America, often find ourselves actually in a socioeconomic position. If we are truly honest about it with ourselves, we find ourselves in a socioeconomic class position that is often far higher than your average African American citizen, and far higher than your your average indigenous American citizen. And if you're truly thinking about it, actually, like, it often, especially with like the Asian immigrant community, the larger Asian immigrant community, it is often also far higher than even the traditionally large numbers of immigrants that come, which is the Latino community. Or maybe it might be stat, but like, you can look at the empirics. We cannot like hide away from this shit. The fact is, like, Asian Americans get like a weird kind of like privilege pass in terms of like acceptance from the dominant castes of America. Like what I will use that same terminology, using how like many scholars have like have often like utilized like the far larger history of like of apartheid, that is the caste system in South Asia, with the European white supremacist racialized system that was brought about with Judeo-Christian and Islamic structures, socioeconomic structures. So we cannot go away from that. We cannot, and these same caste structures also translate to like East Asian social and spiritual systems as well. So we cannot go away from that, and we shouldn't, because otherwise we do our people, our fellow human beings, a significant disservice. All right, going back to the book. And again, the far greater eloquence of Jaclyn Backhaus, whom I suggest everybody pick up this book. It's very easy to read. It's accessible. I do believe it's being written for like middle schoolers, or those going into middle school, or thereabouts. So this is not like thing you can pick it up, please, and read it. I believe everybody should read this. Everybody living in America should read it, so that it gives you strength to fight against sort of like just the oppressive status quo. All right, part 5. Jaclyn Backhaus writes, origin of the phrase. Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz, historian and author of the book Not a Nation of Immigrants, Settler Colonialism, White Supremacy, and a History of Erasure and Exclusion, looks at the phrase in the context of the times. Why did then Senator John F. Kennedy choose the title for his book? Was it because he himself was a descendant of immigrants, or was there more to the story? Dunbar Ortiz it was because he wanted to turn a quote unquote negative into a positive and secure his position as a potential candidate for president. In the early 1950s, Ben Epstein, the director of the Anti Defamation League, had reached out to Kennedy to support his cause. The ADL is a civil rights organization originally founded to combat anti Semitism, discrimination, or hatred against Jewish people. Epstein was concerned with rising cases of xenophobia, the hatred of people from other countries in America. So Epstein tasked Kennedy to produce an essay that would place immigrants and immigration in a positive light and outlined his vision for immigration reform. Kennedy's essay was a mainstream hit and would soon pave the way for the theoretical embrace of immigration as the heart of American life. The politicization of immigration, it seems, was inevitable. And yet, what remains is the fact that immigrants are arriving in our country every day, many of them refugees and asylum seekers. They are real humans with real stories and true histories. We hope to bring these stories into context with one another and to make connections among them in an attempt to further unite the people of the United States. Who's who? According to the human rights organization Amnesty International, a refugee is a person who flees their home because they are at risk for serious human rights violations and their government cannot or will not protect them from danger. For example, in February 2022, Russia waged war on neighboring Ukraine, forcing millions of Ukrainians to leave their homeland. All refugees have a right to international protection. An asylum seeker is a person seeking protection from serious human rights violations, but hasn't been recognized legally as a refugee. This person is awaiting a decision on their asylum or protection. Seeking asylum is also a human right. All right, another pause before we go on to part 6. I want anybody who is seeking a better life, if you're outside the West, America, wherever you are, I don't care what like the people of those countries say. All right, you have a right to go wherever you want. All right, you have the right to travel. You have the right to seek a better life. Make no mistake about it. You have a human right to seek a better life, right? And you have a legal right to seek a better life. I will speak for my own country, my own countries. I am a citizen of 3 different countries. I'm a citizen of America, Canada, and an overseas citizen of India. And I dare say I will fucking speak for all 3 countries and say whoever is escaping persecution can come to any of those countries and seek asylum as a human goddamn right, all right? I will just tell you very honestly that your chances of having honest legal representation in a less corrupt system is far more likely in number 1, Canada, and number 2, America. And among the countries that I have personal experience of, far, number 3 is probably India, though that might change and vary depending on where you're from, etc. I might be shitting on the country that I was born in, but I am just being honest about the systems of corruption and violence as they exist. The fact is, at the very least, you have certain inalienable rights that as long as you play your cards right, you can keep pushing towards, and as long as you are not an idiot and don't break the law and don't fall prey to criminalization, you can find a way to like get settler privileges here. It'll take a long ass fucking time, but you have that right. So if you are escaping, if you're a climate refugee, if you're escaping persecution, including from the country that I was born in, if you are a Dalit or a Muslim or an Adivasi or like someone who is an oppressed minority in India facing like the devastation and the brutality of the current like freaking ethno-fascist upsurge that is going on there in India and in all quite frankly, most of the countries of Asia and Europe and many parts of Africa, fucking leave. Get your ass as safely as possible to a better place and seek asylum and if you don't have legal asylum, if you seek refugee status, if you cannot seek refugee status, seek asylum status, find as much work as you can, make friends with like the people who are here. There will be people that are do-gooders, including many religious people. You might very well be religious. There are a lot of religious organizations who want to help refugees and asylum seekers. Make friends with them. That's one good thing about like believing in Skyfather. Like make it work for you. You know what I'm saying? All right. Number 6, the problem with the nation of immigrants. Backhaus writes. This phrase might give pause to groups of Americans who feel that these words don't actually represent them. Let's consider first the case of the indigenous people who originally populated North America. When the earliest European settlers arrived on the shores of the continent, they did not find the land uninhabited. The land was home to thousands of tribes, tribal nations, and tribal organizations, each with their own specific languages, codes of law, cultures, and habitual practices. Over the next several hundred years, their tribal lands were forcibly and often violently taken from them. While the European settlers organized their own revolutionary war, they also began writing and enacting their own laws. Many of these laws were antagonistic, violent, or genocidal in nature towards indigenous people. And in many instances, throughout our nation's history, the forced migration of indigenous tribes is well documented. Consider the Trail of Tears, 1830 to 1840, a series of forced displacements in which roughly 100,000 Native Americans were removed from their homelands by the US government, leaving thousands to die along the way. What does it mean when people are moved from place to place against their will? The European wave of arrival to North America and the system of thought that resulted in the settlers laying claim to land that was not theirs is part of a mindset, structure, and sequence of actions called settler colonialism. What does that mean? Settler colonialism is a form of colonialism in which an invading settler society seeks to replace the indigenous original population of a territory, in this case, the Native Americans, often through violence and domination. The framework of settler colonialism gives us a specific lens as we look back on the early days of European arrival to North America. We are able to identify that, yes, perhaps those settlers did arrive because of religious persecution or violence in their homelands. But when they arrived, they exploited, stole, and claimed lands from existing inhabitants, Native Americans. Rather than working with existing tribes or learning their cultures and practices in order to find compromise, the European settlers and their larger colonizing force, the British Empire, sorry for that commentary, learned their practices to benefit themselves and then embarked on a campaign of genocide. What's that word? Genocide is the murder of a large group of people from a particular nation, ethnic group, or religion with the goal of eliminating that group from existence or from a particular location. The word was coined in 1944 by a Jewish lawyer named Raphael Lemkin. 49 of Lemkin's relatives were killed in the Holocaust when Nazi Germany murdered over 6 million Jews between 1933 and 1945. Holy fucking crap. 49, I mean, I knew about the number of 6 million, but I did not know that the term was coined by it. There's a reason to coin a term like that. Yep. All right, back to Backhaus. There are nearly 600 indigenous nations active and existing today, and the United States is still reckoning with the violence and harm enacted on indigenous people throughout history. For a deeper look into this important history, you can read Indigenous America, another book in the True History series. Yeah, this is from the True History series, apparently. I didn't know that. I believe, like, we need, like, history is so important, and we just need, we need to read history with the most critical lens we can. All right, back to Backhaus. The treatment of indigenous people is another hard history, one that should be viewed in its full light so that future generations can stop repeating the mistakes of the past. Number 7, enslaved Africans. Another group that is erased when we use the phrase a nation of immigrants is a group of people who are the backbone of this country's origin and capitalism. The enslaved Africans who were captured and sold in bondage to work in labor camps in the United States. Because they were moved against their will, forcibly and violently, they cannot be considered immigrants, but rather victims of kidnapping and human trafficking. The phrase erases their history completely by either insinuating that they were immigrants or they are not included as citizens of this country. And again, I want to take a little pause for a little commentary break. I will again own up to the fact that the people, the folks that I ethnically, whatever, identify as Asian Americans, Indian Americans, South Asian Americans, we are just as guilty, if not far more guilty, of anti-Black racism, and because we also face a lot of anti-Asian and anti-Indian racism, not just because, but it is it is very much part of our cultures. It is not just because we might face, and I really want to be clear about that we face racism, but it is not because of racism that we face from white people or Black people or other brown people or whatever, or within each other, that we have anti-Black racism within us. Anti-Black racism has been cultivated for a long ass time in cultures across the world that have tried to take and use looksism, especially fair-skinned looksism, to establish dominant modes. It's part and parcel of like all the fucking religions of the world. It's part and parcel of like all the goddamn like colonizing processes of the world. So like this is extremely important to like talk about and not exclude. So I'm really happy that she's doing this. This whoever this lady is, she kicks ass. Jaclyn Backhaus, good on you for writing this book. During the Reconstruction era, the period, Jaclyn Backhaus writes, during the Reconstruction era, the period after the American Civil War, many formerly enslaved people and their descendants found that living conditions in states where slavery was recently legal were dangerous. This spurred the Great Migration, another movement of Black people within the country, many from the South, towards seemingly more integrated states in the North. In these scenarios, we see something similar to the often heard plight of the immigrant, someone who finds their place of origin unsafe to inhabit, who hopes for a better life for their children and who strives to make it right by entering a new land of opportunity. While these families' ancestors and members of their immediate families may have lived in bondage, they were striving for a fair, just, and equal life. That striving continues to this day as we reckon with societal inequity based in the roots of white supremacy, the belief that white people are the superior race, born on this soil from the American project of enslavement. The foundation of America rests on perpetuated values of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These communities, like so many others, had and continue to have to fight for America to uphold those values, to live up to the great American promise. When we talk about immigration, it is important to set the scene for the landing place. Though two major groups, indigenous people and the descendants of enslaved Africans, do not claim the mantle of immigrants, they are part of the foundation on which the country was built, as are the original settlers who ignored the existing foundation and framework of the land, laid claim to it in the name of discovery, ownership, and newness. These groups of people laid the groundwork for the founding of the United States. This is the land that newcomers from all over the world are arriving to. Part 7, to whom the phrase speaks. And yet, in all the pain of erasure, there is something inherently hopeful about the idea of America's promise. I live in Queens, Backhaus writes, Jaclyn Backhaus. I live in Queens, a borough of New York City that is home to Jackson Heights, a neighborhood that was recently named one of the most diverse in the world. My Queens neighborhood, Ridgewood, is a few over from Jackson Heights. When I leave my front door and walk up to Seneca Avenue, the main thoroughfare, I pass a Venezuelan restaurant that neighbors a Yemeni bodega. Farther down, I pass a Polish grocery, a German bakery, a Nepalese breakfast spot, and a Mexican restaurant. A few blocks away, a Colombian cake shop, a Dominican nail salon, a Korean nail salon, an Indian eyebrow threading salon, an Italian grocer. This confluence of culture speaks to a sense of thriving and intermingling, of symbiosis and merging. It seems as through the American promise is at work. But it also speaks to the history and pattern of human movement. Behind each of these storefronts on Seneca Avenue are people, families, and stories. Perhaps their parents immigrated, or their grandparents or great-grandparents did. Maybe they immigrated themselves. Some may have resettled here as refugees, while others are asylum seekers. Some may be unable to return to their homelands. Others might still maintain ties to their home countries and are working to ensure the arrival of their home families. Perhaps they are naturalized citizens, or they have their green cards, or they are undocumented. You will learn about these terms soon. And many are citizens by birth. Yet undoubtedly, all their lives have been shaped and informed by U.S. laws, for better or for worse. These laws may have welcomed them and their ancestors, or they may have attempted or still attempt to keep them out. And these laws, as you will soon learn, have a long history of evolving and devolving. What impact do these shifting laws have as generations of immigrants, descendants plant roots and attempt to thrive here? We'll be exploring that and so much more in this book. So is America a nation of immigrants, a melting pot, a land of opportunity? Through the documented histories of immigration, we will look at where these phrases succeed and where they fail. Together, we will seek to discover whether our country can keep the promise it made. Let's talk about it. Do you believe that America is a nation of immigrants? Why or why not? Do you think it's possible for any phrase to speak on behalf of all American people? Why or why not? All right. The next one will be chapter 2. Thank you for joining me for this live reading of A New History of Immigration by Jaclyn Backhaus, part of the True History series by by whom? Who are the publishers of this book? Penguin Workshop, an imprint of Penguin Roundabouts LLC, New York. Thank you very much. Hope you all, hope, well, none of you, but if anybody saw this, pick up this book, read it. Chapter 2 coming up in a little bit, maybe tomorrow.